It's comparatively commonplace to see women practising as barristers today, but before 1976 in New South Wales, it was a very different story. Ada Emily Evans holds the distinction of being Australia's first female law graduate. Coming from a family, as she put it, saturated in law, Ada Evans graduated from the University of Sydney's School of Law in 1902, just 1 year before her Victorian counterpart, Floss Greig.
At the time, the dean of the law school didn't want to admit women at all, and as I found in my own work, the dean was away on holidays and somebody else was an acting dean, and it was in that little narrow window that Ada managed to get admitted. By the time that he came back from holidays, Ada had been enrolled by the university, and it was too late to go back.
However, it was not until the Women's Legal Status Act was finally passed in 1918 that Ada was admitted to practice. Despite offers of briefs, poor health, family commitments and her long absence from the law combined to ensure that Ada Evans never practised. New South Wales' first practising woman barrister and beneficiary of Ada Evans' long struggle was Sybil Morrison, admitted to the Sydney Bar in 1924. Sybil read with Joseph Brown, a barrister and member of the New South Wales Parliament who specialised in commercial matters. As with so many of her contemporaries, Sybil Morrison proved a novelty in more ways than one.
She benefited from a male mentor in the first instance, and in her case it was the solicitor who at the time was Attorney General, and she really paid tribute to him. She said, "He has now shown that his concession to women then was not merely political, he has given definite proof of his faith in their ability." He was the one that I think made her admission possible by passing, what was it called, the Women's Legal Status Act. So, and he was Mr. D.R. Hall. But then, despite whatever difficulties she had in practice, she also praised her colleagues. And she's quoted as saying, "In the beginning, when I was terribly nervous, the men used to escort me along Phillip Street and into the court. There certainly is a prejudice against women in the law, but I must say that all the men were very good to me when I started."
Sybil Morrison worked with the National Council of Women in the 1920s, but contemporary newspapers were more interested in Sybil's femininity than her feminism.
Well, it begins with the Brisbane Daily Mail, who reported breathlessly that she was, quote, "stitching busily during the interview, which was evidence that her studies and profession had not supplanted her womanly attributes." And then it went on, "Like most women who've proved their utility and adaptabilities for spheres usually considered the monopoly of the male, this lady barrister retains her femininity in spite of the legal wig."
The second woman to practice at the New South Wales Bar was Nerida Cohen. She obtained degrees in arts and law at Sydney University and did her articles with Piggott, Stinson, McGregor and Palmer before going to the bar.
This was where I met my next snag. Everyone that I spoke to had some excuse. Either there were no facilities for women in the buildings, or they had somebody else. Something was always a good reason why they shouldn't take a woman. However, Mr. W.B. Simpson agreed to take me if he couldn't find somebody else who would. And that is how I started at the bar.
Nerida built up her practice, specialising in industrial and family law.
It was during the course of one of my cases before the Industrial Commission of New South Wales that I first put the proposition of gradual increase in women's wages. My proposition was that women's wages should be increased in the first year to 60% of the male wage, the next year to 65%, and by gradual increases of 5% each year until finally they achieved equality.
Nerida Cohen was interested in voting rights and divorce law, particularly in trying to get uniform divorce law throughout Australia. A keen feminist, Nerida eventually became Australian chairman of the Equal Civil and Political Rights Committee of the International Alliance of Women. Although she ceased to actively practice in 1946 when she married Bernard Goodman, Nerida Cohen became Vice President of the Liberal Party's Darlinghurst branch and eventually the first President of the Women Lawyers Association, founded in 1952.
When I came along, I permanently interrupted her career. She was a retired barrister when I was a child.
While Nerida Cohen was at the bar during the late 1930s, several women were admitted to practice but remained on the bar's non-practising list. Jean Mailer was admitted in 1937. Her brother Ronald was also a barrister. Jean never practised at the bar, instead becoming a highly respected editor at the Law Book Company and then Butterworth's for the rest of her career. Practising woman barrister number 3 was Anne Bernard, who before she came to the bar was a crack shot with a rifle, a keen aviator, and knew Sir Charles Kingsford Smith when she worked in Fiji in 1928. He called her Bernie.
That's correct. So she then decides to get a job at the chambers of Sir Henry Scott. And then she becomes like a law clerk in there. Because I think that's the thing that motivated her to go and do her law at Oxford in England, 1938. So she went through the bombing of England. So just imagine the people she must have met. So she did 1938 to 42, comes back to Australia, applies to the New South Wales Supreme Court to practice as a barrister.
In 1943, Anne Bernard was junior to Sir Garfield Barwick, then a King's Counsel, who unsuccessfully argued that the artist William Dobell should not have been awarded the Archibald Prize for his portrait of Joshua Smith, deemed to be a caricature. Throughout the 1940s, Anne Bernard ran a number of cases. She acted for the daughter of English suffragette Adela Pankhurst Walsh, who had been detained under wartime regulations, applying for a habeas corpus to secure her release. Anne Bernard then returned to Fiji to practice for some years, where she adopted a daughter, Angela.
I think she was a very outstanding woman. My father said to me, he said, could you imagine a woman in 1942 getting up in court and pleading? He said that'd be unheard of.